All right, so today we're going to be taking a deep dive into a story that feels like it's ripped straight from the headlines. I mean, we've got this article from The Guardian you sent over about Greenland, and wow, it's giving some serious Cold War thriller vibes.
Yeah, it's a pretty wild situation.
We've got world leaders making pretty provocative statements and another country pushing for independence. And then you've got everyone kind of eyeing this treasure trove of resources that are literally sitting under melting ice.
It really does have all the elements of a high-stakes drama. And the thing is, this isn't just some abstract geopolitical game, you know? What's happening in Greenland right now has the potential to actually, reshape global power dynamics, in a very real way.
Yeah, so maybe for folks who haven't been following this whole story that closely, could you give us a quick recap, like Greenland 101, what's going on?
So Greenland, for those who need a reminder, is a massive island, the biggest one in the world. And right now, it's an autonomous territory of Denmark, but they've been getting closer and closer to full independence for a while now.
Right. And that's where things get interesting, because there are local elections coming up in April.
Yeah.
And those could be a huge turning point. They're going to give us a sense of how strongly Greenlanders feel about potentially breaking away from Denmark completely.
Exactly. And this whole internal struggle for self-determination that's going on is playing out against this backdrop of, increasing global interest in Greenland, particularly from the U.S.
And that is where Donald Trump enters the picture. His recent statements about potentially using tariffs or even military force to gain control of Greenland have really stirred things up. And it's not the first time he's made comments like this either.
Right.
Back in 2019, he floated the idea of just buying Greenland.
Yeah, which Denmark understandably found a bit absurd.
Just a little bit.
Yeah.
So Denmark has been trying to downplay those remarks and, maintain that good relationship with the U.S. But it's tricky, right?
Oh, it's a very tricky situation.
Because you have on one hand them trying to smooth things over with Denmark. But then at the same time, you have Trump's son, Donald Trump Jr., visiting Greenland. And he made some pretty pointed comments.
He did.
He talked about Greenland feeling exploited by Denmark and suggested that they were missing out on fully exploiting their natural resources.
Yeah.
So was this just a private visit, or was there something more strategic going on?
Right. And how did it play in Greenland itself? Did it influence public opinion at all? Did it embolden maybe those who are pushing for a faster break from Denmark?
Those are some of the questions that are swirling around Greenland right now. And I mean, we can't know for sure what the motives were behind that visit. But it definitely throws a wrench into an already complex situation.
For sure.
And then on top of all of this, we have to remember the global context. I mean, Trump has also made remarks about using force to take control of the Panama Canal and using economic force to absorb Canada.
Right. So these comments about Greenland, they might seem outlandish on the surface, but they kind of fit into a larger pattern of behavior.
Yeah.
And that's why the international community is taking all of this very seriously. Germany and France in particular have been really vocal in condemning these statements. They've emphasized the importance of respecting international law and the inviolability of borders. And it's interesting to note that Germany's reaction is coming at a time when they're increasing their own defense spending in response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
Oh, wow.
So they see a dangerous parallel here, a powerful nation threatening to use force to seize territory.
It seems like everyone is on edge, and they're watching the situation in Greenland very, very closely. But in all of this, I think it's important that we don't lose sight of the people at the heart of it, the Greenlanders themselves. So what's their perspective on all of this?
Well, their Prime Minister, Mute Bjerregaard, has made it crystal clear. Greenland is not for sale and will never be for sale.
Whoa.
That statement was a direct response to Trump's previous comments about buying the island and a powerful assertion of Greenland's desire for self-determination.
Yeah. And then shortly after Trump Jr.'s visit, Bjerregaard canceled a meeting with the Danish king, which some saw as a deliberate snub.
Right.
A way of signaling displeasure with Denmark's handling of the situation.
It definitely added fuel to the fire, that's for sure. And it speaks to this delicate balancing act that Bjerregaard is trying to maintain. He needs to appease those in Greenland who want a clean break from Denmark, while also navigating these external pressures from, powerful nations.
It's like he's walking a tightrope, trying to find that sweet spot between asserting Greenland's independence and avoiding any actions that could provoke a negative response from the U.S. or Denmark.
Exactly. And, this whole situation really highlights the challenges that a lot of countries face when they're trying to assert their independence in a world where larger powers still wield considerable influence.
Yeah. So let's talk about what exactly it is about Greenland that has everyone so interested. What's the big deal here?
Okay, so The Guardian article you sent mentions Greenland's abundance of natural resources. We're talking everything from coal and uranium to rare earth minerals and even diamonds.
Wow.
But it's not just the sheer volume of resources, it's also the fact that climate change is causing the ice caps to melt, and that's potentially opening up new shipping routes
Yeah.
and making those resources way more accessible.
So it's almost like a perfect storm brewing.
It is.
We have this resource-rich region that's strategically located in the Arctic, a region that's becoming increasingly important as the ice melts. And then on top of that, you have a power vacuum emerging as Greenland pushes for independence.
It really is a recipe for tension, and that's why everyone is watching the situation so closely.
So I think this brings us back to our listener. Like, why should you care about what's happening in this seemingly far-off corner of the world? I mean, this isn't just about Greenland. This is a microcosm of the challenges and opportunities that we face in a world that's grappling with climate change, resource scarcity, and shifting power dynamics.
Exactly what's happening in Greenland could set a precedent for how these types of situations are handled in the future. Will we see a return to great power competition and a disregard for international norms? Or will we find a way to cooperate and ensure that the interests of all parties, including the people of Greenland, are respected? I mean, those are the stakes. That's why this story matters.
Yeah, it really is fascinating. On the one hand, you have all this potential for economic growth and development, but on the other hand, you have this very real risk of exploitation and environmental damage. It makes you wonder, can Greenland even achieve genuine independence in a world where everyone seems to want a piece of their pie?
That is the million-dollar question. And it's not even just about those external pressures either. Greenland is also facing all these internal divisions. And the upcoming elections, those are going to be absolutely crucial in understanding how the different factions within Greenland view their path to independence.
Okay, so let's break down some of those different perspectives then. The Guardian article mentions that some Greenlanders support a more gradual transition, working with Denmark to kind of slowly build the infrastructure and the institutions that are needed for full independence.
Right. They argue that rushing into independence without that proper preparation could leave Greenland really vulnerable to those external pressures. They point to the fact that right now Greenland relies very heavily on subsidies from Denmark, and they're worried about the economic consequences of severing those ties too quickly.
So then you have the other side of the coin, the group that's pushing for a more immediate break from Denmark. What's their argument?
Well, this group believes that Greenland has waited long enough, and that true self-determination requires complete control over their own destiny. They argue that Greenland has the resources and the potential to thrive as an independent nation, and they feel that continued reliance on Denmark is only holding them back.
I can see the logic in both arguments. It's a tough call, and I can only imagine there are some really strong emotions on both sides of this debate. And it's not just about political independence either, is it? There are social and cultural considerations as well.
Absolutely. Greenland has a unique culture and identity. It's been shaped by their history and by their relationship with Denmark. So the question of how that identity evolves in the context of independence is a really complex one. Will Greenland be able to preserve its cultural heritage while also embracing its new role on the world stage?
There are so many layers to unpack here. And it's a reminder that independence isn't just a political concept. It's about people and culture and identity. But let's shift gears for a second and talk about the potential economic implications of independence. We know that Greenland has these vast natural resources, but what does that actually mean in terms of economic viability?
Well, it's important to remember that just having resources doesn't automatically translate into economic prosperity. Actually, extracting and processing those resources requires significant investment, infrastructure, and expertise. And then even on top of that, there's the question of market access. Like, who are the potential buyers for these resources? And what are the terms of trade?
It's not as simple as just digging stuff up and selling it. And then there are also all those environmental concerns to think about. The Guardian article mentions concerns about the impact of mining on Greenland's fragile ecosystem.
Yeah, that's a huge concern. I mean, the Arctic environment is particularly vulnerable to things like pollution and habitat destruction. And then as climate change accelerates the melting of the ice caps, that potential for environmental damage only increases.
So it's a classic dilemma. The potential for economic development, but it comes with all these risks. Can Greenland find a way to balance economic growth with environmental protection?
That's the challenge facing not just Greenland, but countries all over the world, right? It's about finding that path to sustainable development, a way to utilize resources responsibly without compromising the health of the environment or the well-being of future generations.
And this brings us back to the role of the international community. How can countries like the US and Denmark engage with Greenland in a way that supports its development, but without exploiting its resources or its people?
That's where things get really tricky. There's such a fine line between offering support and exerting too much influence. And, there's a long history of powerful nations exploiting resource-rich countries, particularly in the developing world. So there's a real need for transparency and accountability and a genuine commitment to partnership rather than exploitation.
It sounds like a really tall order, especially in a world where geopolitical competition seems to be heating up. It makes you wonder, what if Greenland does achieve full independence? Would they even be able to navigate this complex landscape and chart their own course? Or would they end up becoming a pawn in this larger geopolitical game?
That's the central question, and it's one that only time will really be able to answer. But what's clear is that Greenland's story is a microcosm of these larger forces that are shaping our world. Climate change, resource scarcity, the struggle for self-determination, the choices that are made in Greenland are going to have ripple effects far beyond its borders.
So we've covered a lot of ground here today. We talked about Greenland's internal politics, the economic implications of independence, the environmental challenges, and the role of the international community. It's a lot to process. So this brings us back to our listener again. Why should you care about what's happening in this seemingly remote corner of the world?
Because, as we've seen, Greenland is not an isolated case. It's a window into the future. The challenges and opportunities facing Greenland are the same challenges and opportunities facing the entire world. The melting ice caps the competition for resources, the struggle for self-determination. These are global issues. And how we address them in Greenland will set a precedent for how we address them everywhere else.
It's a reminder that we're all interconnected, and that the choices that we make individually and collectively have global consequences. And that's why it's so important to stay informed and to engage in critical thinking and to demand that our leaders act responsibly and ethically on the world stage.
Yeah, it does feel like we're at a crossroads here. The decisions that are made in the next few years by Greenland and by those global powers involved, they're going to have ripple effects for decades to come. But it's not all doom and gloom, right? I mean, there are some potential positive outcomes here, too.
Oh, absolutely. This situation also presents a really unique opportunity. If this is handled carefully, Greenland's journey towards independence could actually become a model for how to navigate things like resource management, sustainable development, and international cooperation in the 21st century.
Okay, so let's talk solutions. What are some concrete steps that can be taken to make sure that this transition, whether it happens gradually or more quickly, is a success? What does responsible engagement from the U.S. and Denmark even look like? Well, I think for starters, both countries need to move away from this language of ownership and control. Greenland isn't just some piece of real estate to be bought, sold, or militarily dominated. It's a nation with its own aspirations, its own people, its own culture.
So let's talk about taking Greenland as more about a genuine partnership. But what does that look like in practice?
It means listening to the people of Greenland and respecting their right to self-determination. It means investing in education infrastructure and economic development in a way that actually benefits Greenlanders, not just foreign corporations.
What about on the environmental front? How can we ensure that Greenland's unique ecosystem isn't sacrificed in the pursuit of economic gain?
Right. Well, that's where things get even trickier. There needs to be a firm commitment to sustainable development, with strict environmental regulations and a focus on renewable energy sources. And it's not just up to Greenland either. The international community needs to step up and provide financial and technical assistance to help Greenland make this transition.
So it sounds like there's a real opportunity for collaboration here, a chance to show that economic development and environmental protection can actually go hand in hand. But this requires a shift in mindset, right? A move away from this zero-sum mentality that pits economic interest against environmental concerns.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we're all in this together. The choices that we make in Greenland and the Arctic that are going to affect us all. Climate change doesn't respect borders. And the environmental consequences of unsustainable development are going to be felt globally.
This whole conversation has been so eye-opening. Greenland might seem like a faraway place, but it's a microcosm of the challenges and opportunities that are facing our world today. It's a reminder that we're all interconnected and that the decisions we make individually and collectively are going to shape the future.
And as we've discussed, you, the listener, you have a role to play in this too. Stay informed, ask questions, and hold your leaders accountable. Demand that they engage with these issues in a way that prioritizes cooperation, sustainability, and the well-being of all people.
I think that's a perfect note to end on. This deep dive into Greenland's geopolitical drama has been insightful, challenging, and ultimately hopeful. We've seen the potential for conflict, but we've also seen the potential for collaboration and positive change. And I think that's what we need to focus on. We'll definitely be keeping a close eye on this story as it unfolds, and we encourage you to do the same. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning.